How to handle tantrums. What do personality types have to do with family relationships? What does 90 seconds have to do with behavior? And you just might come away chanting a new slogan: keep calm and parent on. It's all here in my conversation with parenting coach Mindy Green. Welcome, Mindy Green, to Intent on Purpose. Thank you for spending your time with me today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell me, Mindy, what do you put your time, energy, and talent into? What do you believe?
Oh, that's such a great question. And as I was thinking about this, as I was prepping for what I would chat about today, is I really believe that and wholeheartedly and passionately that our children deserve the very best from us that we can give. And that's not to say that we have to be perfect, but so that they can grow up to be healthy, thriving adults. And so it all begins at home. So my focus is really helping parents and families create the emotional environment where their kids can do that.
And how do they do that?
I think it's being present, and there are so many distractions today, and there's so many things that take away. And I talk a lot about things from a nervous system regulation standpoint, because I think that we are all walking around wired and tired and overwhelmed, and so I'm learning how to do this, and it's something that I've had to learn in raising my four kids. And so I help as a parent coach, I help other parents be able to do that.
I love that, wired and tired.
Yes.
Wired and tired. So, what does a parenting coach do? Do you start when they're babies? You go in their houses and point out, hey, wait, nah, don't do that. You like give play by play actions, you videotape them, and let's replay that. Do that again. What do you do?
So yeah, so what you said almost sounds like Super Nanny, right? I remember watching, there was a show, I think Super Nanny, and they would have a nanny come in and talk to them about different things. But actually what I do is I have a background as a school social worker. And so what I do as a parent coach is I educate parents and also schools, because I'm a bridge between home and school, to help the adults in our children's lives better be able to regulate themselves. And so I have lots of resources around that, how to regulate ourselves, how to understand what's beneath a child's behavior. And I do that through the lens of personality. And so that because each of us has our own unique personality. And so I use the DISC, which is a personality assessment that
Mhm.
people may, and the audience may think of in the business setting, but it's been adapted to look at the relationship of those in the home. So a parent and child or children, because I can say this from having, so I have four kids and each one of them has such a distinct personality. So I go from, my oldest daughter who wants to have control over everything and she wants to have a say. She's very dominant and very strong personality, to my youngest who is like, very, very outgoing. And I call him the Pied Piper of people. And so then you have me, and I'm like, can't we all just get along trying to navigate this family life? And so I bring those insights and help families figure out what the dynamics are that they're dealing with in their own homes, and then give them strategies to work through some of the challenges that they may face.
I've taken that DISC personality assessment too. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very enlightening, especially
Yes.
that breaking point. I really like that because I'm one that likes to get everyone to get along too, but don't push us too far. There's a
Yes.
limit, as I remember. We're just
Yes.
hunky dory. And then if you get to that point, no, we're not.
Yeah.
Don't.
It gets a
So
little
anybody
messy
out
after
there
that.
listening to this and you got someone who gets along, team player, no, there's a point. Don't push it. So how does that work? I mean, at what age do these personalities show up enough that you can actually count on their behavior or follow a pattern?
Yeah, so the disc actually, the assessments actually can be used as young as 4. And so what that looks like, because, obviously they're not going to be filling in the bubble or checking off certain things at 4, but they interpret pictures. And so and that gives you an idea of what their natural tendencies are. And so from there, then you can figure out like where they might need some support, what you can help to encourage them in, and then also those areas where it might be a trigger for you. Because I don't know about you, Laura, but my kids, there were certain things that they would do, and I was like, whew, and I am a team player, like you said, but when I would get to that certain point, I was like, ooh. And so I would have to put myself in timeout. So, but really, the most of the families that I work with are really starting around, the kids are around age 8 and through teenagers. And I say that that's really like the time that independence, those personality traits really become strong and you can see them very distinctly. And then you're trying to figure out like, well, how do I allow them to be independent and also not kill them at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's where my work really comes in. And I have a program that parents can go through. It's called the Parenting Blueprint. And
Mm-hmm.
it talks to them about the different personalities, what their emotional needs are. And there's also a great section too that can be shared with schools about their learning styles. Like, how do you get the most out of a kid in the classroom who has this type of personality? So it's really beneficial for everyone, and helping parents then to be able to advocate once they know what their child's personality and needs are, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
advocate, say, I understand you're having a little bit of challenge here in the classroom, and this is what I've noticed. And then you can give them this very nice report that breaks it down, because sometimes teachers don't know either because they have 20, 30 kids in a classroom. And so it can be overwhelming for them too to try to meet everyone's needs.
Absolutely. Can't put down teachers. There's
No,
no way. No, we're not
no,
doing that. We're assisting
no.
them. So when do you get a call, or is a parent desperate when you come in? Are they proactive? Has the school contacted? I mean, tell me how you get involved.
Yeah, definitely. So I've had some parents who reach out because they are at the end of their rope, or they've maybe gone to a counselor, and so they're looking, and that's digging deeper into some of the things. And not that coaching doesn't can't go deep, but we're very action oriented, and so sometimes it's a referral from a counselor. Sometimes it's a parent sees something that I'm on social media. I have a presence there. They may resonate with, I don't understand my kid, I'm yelling constantly and I don't want to do that. So there's something that triggers that moment when they need to put their hand up and say, I need help. And then for teachers, I do a lot of, I lean into the schools and I do PDs, professional development for them, and talking about for them too, what are they seeing in the classroom? And then, giving some language to it other than, educator language, so for them, it's easier to think of like they have in a classroom of 30 kids that they have only 4 personalities to figure out, 4 types of personalities. Once they're
Mm-hmm.
able to do that, then it frees up some of their energy as well. And
Yeah.
then they can have real conversations, both parents and educators, about what can be most beneficial for their kids. So I have a lot of different entry points. And so, and that just continues to expand. And another thing that I've been able to do is I wrote my first children's book, and that came out in October of
Oh,
last
exciting.
year. Yes,
What's it
I'm so
called?
thrilled.
It
It
is
was,
exciting. What's it called?
it's called Sammy's Super Stretchy Shoelaces. So a bit of a mouthful, but it's such a fun book, and it was inspired by my 9-year-old grandson who's having issues with his own shoelaces that just seem to get longer and longer, and he's trying to figure out how to tie them and keep them tied. And so he and I created a really fun story, and I found a fabulous illustrator. So that's another way that I've been able to get into the schools and talk about how do we regulate ourselves, like from an emotional resilience standpoint, problem solving, dealing with those big feelings. And we all have them as adults. Even I don't, I can say I don't always know how to handle my big feelings either. So, just great it's just really about the conversations that we're having.
That reminds me, when talking about big feelings and regulation, let me ask you some questions about that.
Yeah.
Number one, the generations. You say you're a grandparent, I'm a grandparent. So I'm at the very beginning of Gen X. So,
Yeah.
so my parents, they were people of their time. I'm a person of my time. I
Yes.
think I listen to my babies when they're younger. I listen to them. I'm going to cut this all out. But anyway, let me say, so we're talking about regulating feelings, and I want to talk about generations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at the very beginning of Gen X. Like my older sibling is baby boomer. I'm Gen X.
Mm.
We handled emotions differently.
Yes.
And now we have this other generation. Social media is pretty kind of slamming us a little bit about how we taught our children about emotions. We have young adults who may not have been taught as children how to regulate their emotions. They're just having little babies now. How do we or you help them kind of go backwards and learn this, but not over learn to regulate their emotions like they're thinking everything is bigger than it is? There's got to be a balance there, isn't there? Or am I off?
No, and I actually, Laura, I'm so glad you asked this question because this is one of the things that I talk a lot about with parents because you're right. I'm also Gen X. So I was born in 1968. Isn't that terrible? I have to remember. So,
We are the same age.
yeah.
We are.
So I'm early Gen X.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I would say is that for me, and like you had said at one point, like my parents were like, you suck it up. And there were only a few emotions that I would say from their standpoint that I don't know that they were acceptable, but they were more understandable to them. So it was either angry, and then you had to get yourself under control, or you were sad. And then if you were sad, you sucked it up. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. And you're right that we do the best that we can with what we have. And that's one of the things that I talk to parents about now is that it may not have been something that they were taught. We were definitely not taught. And it's hard sometimes to teach something that you didn't learn yourself. But what I found in raising my kids is that I was learning along with them. And so I don't want anyone out there who's hearing this to think that it's too late, and there's a lot of, trial and error, like with anyone and this is like that part of emotional intelligence, right? And is recognizing that we can feel those things and it's okay that whatever we're feeling is part of the human experience. So we can feel happy and sad and disappointed and resentful and joyful and all of the different emotions. And that's okay. And what is it that we do with those then? And what I a lot of times spend time with parents on and also their kids is that we can have a feeling and the feeling is separate from an action. So I don't know about you, but in my home growing up, anger, it's like there were things that were associated with anger, actions, behavior. And that's one of the things that I'm helping parents now figure out with their own kids too, is that, and to teach their kids, is that you can feel angry, but you don't have to throw that toy. You don't have to slam the door. You don't have to have an attitude. And it's like teaching them then, well, what do you do with it? And
Mm.
that's something that they're learning along the way too. And again, it's not, you're not looking for perfect. And also the other thing is too, is that sometimes people hear regulation and they're like roll their eyes because they think that means they have to be calm all the time and be really together all the time. It's not. A regulation and also emotional intelligence is about capacity. It's knowing that you feel something and that you can work through it and come out on the other end of it feeling like like you have some understanding of what happened. And then if you need to repair something, that you do that. If that could be an apology, that could be, changing what you do next time. But that this is part of the human experience, and it's us teaching our kids and learning along the way what that looks like.
So that's interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not crazy though. I don't think.
We all are a little bit crazy, but
We all are. But we all have to do our best. But I like this time period that there are emotions spoken of, and we
yes,
can be allowed to feel the feels. But then, what do you do with the feelings, right?
exactly. And also that you can feel it, and as parents we can understand what's behind it or beneath it, and help our kids like figure out what to do next. And it also still doesn't excuse some of the behavior. So it's like, so it's, and that's where these conversations are so important, and having that knowledge ourselves of like, okay, you felt this way, and then you acted out on that, and then now that behavior, it's not okay for you to yell at me, even though I understand why,
Mm-hmm.
what was behind it, and what can you do next time? Can you give me a sign, whether it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down or something, so that I know maybe to talk to you a little bit later about this, especially when you're in those big feelings, because they can be overwhelming. And, you know, I would say this too, that for parents, who have those young kids, the toddlers, and you're seeing those temper tantrums, know that your child is not trying to be difficult. They're just not in control at that point, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so their thinking part of their brain has gone offline. And so they're in that very, we talk about the primitive brain, but they're just going by their impulses at that point, and because they're building those connections in their brain. And so at that point, your whole responsibility is just to keep them safe. No, you don't want them banging their heads or throwing things at their siblings or so trying to keep them safe until they can calm down. Because when someone's in the midst of a big feeling, that's not the time to talk about it. So,
Let me ask you a follow up question on that. That I think that sometimes there's a juxtaposition, right? So you have a parent or a teacher or a caregiver, and there's a situation where a child is really upset. The caregiver or the adult doesn't see why a child should be upset at that thing.
mm-hmm.
Then you have the child who is upset but can't communicate why they're upset. So you have this complete confusion. The parent is like, the caregiver is like, what is the problem?
Mm-hmm.
So you got the orange popsicle instead of the red one. What? And then the child is so upset but cannot explain why they like the strawberry instead of the orange sickle, because they're just so emotional about it. So there is just going to be a breakdown. So
Mm-hmm.
how is that all regulated? That's an example of what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
no, that's a great example. And so in this instance, what I would say is, at that point, even if you ask them and they had words, which, sometimes these, especially when we're in those big emotions, that's pre-verbal, right? So there are not sometimes words to put to that. And so it doesn't make sense because they're not rational, it's not logical. And so with that, then, you know, it's important for us to be able to hold our calm or be regulated enough to help them get to the point where they're regulated. And so in a case like that, it could be that, we make sure that they're in like a safe spot, like in the classroom. I know a lot of them have the calm corners or something like that. Allow them to have that space so they can get themselves together. And then if we can keep ourselves together as much as possible, because sometimes that behavior triggers us, and we're like, they're being disrespectful, or I don't understand that. That's just ridiculous. That's so small. Why can't they just accept what I've given them? All the things that we tell ourselves, right? Which then revs us up. And so then it gets us into the feelings that we're having. And so then we're meeting, a big feeling with another big feeling. And what's going to happen is we're going to butt heads.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where being able to pause as much as possible, whether it's breathing, walking away, um, distracting ourselves with something else, whatever it is that we can do to kind of center ourselves at that point will then allow us to then later on when our kids are calm to go back and have a conversation and and say, like with our child who doesn't like orange popsicles but they like the strawberry ones, to talk about that, in terms that they would understand, oh, we only had orange popsicles left. And, so next time we go to the grocery store, we can pick out the strawberry popsicles now that I know that you like those more, so it's, giving
Mm-hmm.
some context and some opportunity to talk about it in terms that the kids will understand, but not in the moment.
I think that goes back to generations because the generation before us, our parents,
Mm,
may have thought very much, well, why aren't you grateful for the popsicle? I didn't have a popsicle growing up. So that
yes.
added an extra layer of, well, why are you even complaining? I've worked hard for this.
Right.
So
Yes. And
you
feeling
wanted to
like
add
maybe your kids
extra
aren't
pressure.
grateful because
Mhm,
they are throwing a tantrum about something, and you're like, you're right, well, I didn't have to get you popsicles anyway, and
mhm,
next time you're not going to get popsicles. But in
mhm,
the end, the way that I tend to think of for parents and share this with them is that how would you, if that was you, how would you have wanted to be treated? Not how were
mhm,
you treated, but how would you have wanted to be treated? Would you wanted to be
mhm.
treated with a little more understanding and compassion? Because kids also, they can be embarrassed and feel shame when they've fallen apart over something like that,
Mhm.
and that's something that we carry with ourselves too, especially in our generation, right? That, oh, I shouldn't have acted that way. Why couldn't I have been more grateful? Those things, because those are the messages that we're receiving from our parents. And then we carry that into our own interactions with our kids. And that's where, if we notice that popping up, then we have an opportunity to say, wait a minute, why do I think that? So this is some good work that we
Yeah.
can do for ourselves too.
Another question back to the personality type and the disc. So you have a child, and building on what you just said, you have a child who loses it in the classroom, and like you said, is embarrassed the next day they come back, or they've had a conflict with another student who is an opposing disc because they have, as far as I know, I understand with disc, they when you get categorized sounds really bad, but when you find out what your personality type is, one of the
Yes.
things with disc is you find out what your greatest fear is. As
Mm-hmm.
part of it. So you have two children in a classroom, and one does the greatest fear of the other. So there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a little conflict. So two children have a little conflict, and one of the children behaves in a way that's embarrassing in front of the peers. They got to go to school the next day, and they're going to be reluctant to go to school, and the parent may not know why. So the child's embarrassed. They come back. They have to face that, which is pretty brave of a child to do.
Yes.
Children have to be brave every day to show up in class at school,
Mm-hmm.
especially when they get older and there's a lot of and a lot of peer feedback and there's grading,
Oh,
and it's just they're constantly up for criticism. Those teenagers, I don't know how we survive our teenage years.
Don't ask me how I did it. I just did it. It was hard.
You have a child that has to come back and has to face maybe shame or embarrassment, and you have to empower that child to handle that and handle their fears and how people might react to them. How does a parent empower a child to process that? And does a child need to know their personality type? That's a two question. Does it empower? How do you empower your child to face that embarrassment when they've behaved a certain way the next day? How do they go back empowered? And does a child need to know their personality type?
so I would say yes to the question. And I'll say that helping them to understand their personality type not only makes it so that they have that knowledge for themselves, but they also can then see where they might have, why they might have had a conflict with this other student. And that gives them that also then empowers them because they're like, oh, okay. so and so did this, and they're like, let's say they're a strong personality, and this person is more relationship oriented. So I'm just going to use two, and so the student who's more relationship oriented is looking in, and so maybe the one with a strong personality said something that was a little harsh, which felt like it was, that they were being criticized. And so then that got their defenses up and they might have reacted in a certain way. So I think when they understand their own personality type, and I want to say this, we all are a blend of the different types of personalities. So we're not just solely a strong personality or, like my youngest son, the Pied Piper of people. We're not solely that. We're a mixture of those, but we have one that stands out more typically. And so when they have that knowledge, then that helps them to understand that they're not broken, that there is something behind why they reacted the way they are. So there's nothing wrong with them. It's just they're trying to figure out who they are and how they respond and how they manage these situations, which is, as adults, we're doing that as well in our workplaces and our daily lives, with our families, our partners, extended family. So these are all skills that we're teaching them. And so I think that what the benefit of is when they're, whether they're in elementary school, middle school, or high school, or even beyond for our young adults, having this information gives them the power to be aware, to recognize patterns, and then to figure out what the next best step is.
That would be nice, to have a 14-year-old hit themselves. Why did I do that? Why do I always do that? And feel like a loser, because what you're saying is if they can be empowered if they understand, okay, wait, this is just how I'm more naturally going to react to things. I can learn to react better. I can learn to be more empowered. I know what's happening here.
Right.
Am I hearing you correctly?
Exactly. And what a gift that we give our kids when we have that opportunity. And I was thinking back to what I had said earlier about, like, that we weren't taught these things by our parents. Not that they didn't love us or care about us or whatever, but this wasn't something that was even on their radar. And, and so I think that we're giving our kids and our grandkids a gift by being able to then learn this and help them to figure that out for themselves as well, so that they can then learn to be adults that have the capacity and the resilience to go through and manage the things that they will in their lives.
We're sitting here as two white women. Did your parents grow up in America?
They did, yes.
My parents grew up in America. I'm like many generations of Americans. So we're assuming that the way our parents were raised is a generational thing. But there are cultures.
Yes.
We are limiting our understanding by saying it's generational. There are cultures that do this with emotions too. So
yes, Laura, thank you for bringing that up, because that's very true. And I do have, on my father's side, my great grandparents were immigrants, and so they came here around in the early 1900s. And so I just think about, for them, my great grandmother had a very strong personality. And part of it was because she had to be. She immigrated here when she was 9 years old. She left everything that she knew to come here from Germany. And, and then her husband died in 1929. Had young children at home, and she was German, and it was around the world wars and all of that. And so my grandmother, who had been here for many generations, one of the things that she would say about my great grandmother was she was very difficult, and that was her label, oh, you don't want to be like great grandmother Green because she's difficult. And as I've gotten older, I recognize what, that I can't even imagine what her daily life was like, being here. And so I just want to speak to that with the audience, that, like you had said, and I'm so glad you said it, is that there are cultural differences as well, and expectations. And you may have come from somewhere where, emotions, are a taboo subject. You just don't talk about them. You don't acknowledge them. And if you're looking to do something differently, it can feel awkward and strange, and you're not going to do it perfectly. And that's okay, because whether it's a generational thing or a cultural thing, I think the most important thing is that we're open to learning, and we do this with an open mind and open heart.
So true. Because we want our children to be able to, as you say, regulate so they can learn. So if they're sitting in a classroom and they're fuming, and it fumes too long because they're not learning how to handle it in an appropriate way in a time frame that's healthier, I think is what we're really talking about. You got to feel the feels, but at some point you need to be able to handle them in a way that you can move past them.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about? There's a time frame there.
Yes.
So have the feelings and the emotions, and then you're able to move past them in an appropriate time frame so you can get on to learning, and you don't hurt other people. So there's not these huge ramifications, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so that doesn't matter what culture you're from. That's what we want to do, because then we can all benefit each other, because we're all learning and we're a society and we help each other.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way to look at it too. And, it's interesting because there's been research on how long does the emotional cycle take. It's actually, and I was so shocked by this, it's 90 seconds.
What?
Yes. Yes.
I was say that number again. Say that number again.
90 seconds to complete the whole cycle. And what happens though is that because we have maybe some programming, some old thoughts that creep in with that, right? We keep it going. And so that it just loops and loops and loops again. But from the time that we receive like the I'm going to say trigger, to then having the thought and the reaction to it, the feeling, it's 90 seconds.
Wow. So what do we get out of holding on to it for so long?
We don't, do we? We really don't. Because I know people for years, and I'm one of them, that there are things that I still think and feel from years ago.
It's must be getting entrenched in there for something.
Yes.
Oh, we don't learn to.
Yeah, because our brain's always looking for shortcuts. Yeah. Yeah. Our brain's always looking for shortcuts, so it just goes down that path.
90 seconds. I got stuff from years ago. You gotta be kidding. Must be in a little box in there. Just open the box.
Yes.
Maybe it should be, think of it more like tied in a lot of package. I can just untie it. Maybe not a box. That seems so solid. A soft little pouch with a little tie.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Seconds. Wow. We sure want our children to be healthy. And of course, we have to be healthy ourselves, whatever family unit they're living in.
Exactly.
Or whatever culture situation there. Now tell me about homeschooling. How does this work in a homeschooling environment? Because they're with their parents. I homeschool. They are with their parents. There is no outside checks. I mean, they might have a teacher come in if they're with a charter school, but there's nobody to say, oh, that kid looks like they need a little extra help. Do you get homeschoolers coming to you and say, things aren't going well?
I do write some articles for a homeschool, local homeschool group, and I homeschooled for 18 years. And so I know what it's like, because I've been in the trenches there. And, there were days that I was like, minutes, hours, that I was like, oh, I don't know if we're going to make it through the day, much less like the next hour. So it's like, it's just really, it can be very intense, because we're trying to meet the needs of our kids.
Moving my eyes around because you're fine. I can say I blew my top. I was not regulated. We should have known each other then. I would have called you.
We would have been talking to one another, believe me.
Help me.
Yes.
I'm unregulated.
It goes beyond unregulated, right? I was like untethered at times, because I remember a friend called me one day, and so her son like they were going over numbers, and it had been going over for like the names of numbers for quite some time. And so they got to the number 22. And so he looked at her and he said, 2D2? And so she looked at him and she's like, it sounds funny. And at the same time, she's like, we've been going over this for 4 months and you come up with 2D2. And so she's on the phone with me and she's like, and she's outside and she's pacing and she's like, I don't know what to do with that. She's like, is it me? Is it him? Is it us? And so it was just a funny example of, of what it's like to be with our kids all the time. And one of the things that I can say, I did blow my top, like you'd said many times, and I had to come back and that's where the repair comes in, is I would apologize. And I would just say, I didn't handle that well. I apologized, and then we would think of ways maybe that we could handle it differently the next time. I don't want to say better, but it's like, just because I don't want to put judgment on that, because we all have those moments. And there were times that my kids would get angry and they, I had one son who would get frustrated and he'd stomp off upstairs. And I'm like, it's probably best that he goes upstairs because I'm feeling a little bit angry too. Or frustrated. So in terms of homeschooling, it's very similar, looking at what our kids' personalities are, their tendencies toward things, their unique needs, because each personality has their own needs. I have one child who's very needs everything written down and they want to be able to check off the list. And I have another one who's very spontaneous. And so, how do you do that as one person? And then you also brought up too, with needs, I have one child who I didn't realize until later was until 6th grade, maybe, that they had reading challenges. And so, and we just kept going over similar things. And I was like, I'm missing something here. So dyslexia. And so then I started talking to people and I found resources in the community. So, and I'd say this too, that even if they're in school, that doesn't always necessarily mean that some of those things would be picked up on to begin with, because kids feel embarrassed because they maybe not learning the same way or catching on as quickly, or you can fill in the blank. Sometimes there are behavioral issues that go along with that. So then you're thinking, okay, so this is a behavior. This isn't, like a learning challenge that they're having. So, so I say that because, sometimes we can feel guilty ourselves that we didn't pick up on something sooner. And I would say that regardless of the age, being able to pick up on it at all is better than not ever having picked up on it.
And that goes all the way back to, if you wait and then talk to them, you'll be able to figure out, oh, wait, they're just frustrated because they're not learning. And I really like, just one last thing, I really like what you're saying, because it works for fathers and male caregivers as well. This is not a mother thing. This has nothing to do with gender or more masculine ways of looking at things. This has nothing to do with any of that, even though we're sitting here talking as mothers. I love that. Where can people find you? Where can they get in contact with you?
Yep. So I have a website. So you're welcome to go to my website, which is super simple, mindygreencoaching.com. And you can find me on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, same thing, Mindy Green Coaching. And I would love to help any families who are feeling this strain of being in that place of feeling stuck, not knowing what to do next, or thinking there's something wrong with their kids, and maybe their kids thinking there's something wrong with them, because they're just growing and learning and their brains are developing. So there's so much potential and capacity to have the relationships that we want with our kids, and for our kids to have relationships with all the people that they're exposed to. MindyGreenCoaching.com.
Mindy Green. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Top 5 takeaways from Mindy Green. 1. Managing your own stress and reactions is the foundation of effective parenting. 2. Feelings are okay, but acting on them is not always best. 3. Keep going. You are leaning 2. Model not giving up on learning to self-regulate. 4. Understanding your child's personality helps you interpret behavior, reduce conflict, and respond in ways that actually work for them. 5. Emotional reactions naturally pass quickly, but our thoughts keep them going.